The fall 2025 season of Investigation with Dr. T is proudly centering on our institution's newly designated prestigious R1 Carnegie classification. We're seizing this moment to go deeper, think bigger, and highlight the game-changing work that's happening. So each episode this fall is going to spotlight cutting-edge research initiatives, groundbreaking studies, and powerful doctoral dissertations led by PhD and EDD students, research-engaged faculty, field-based research practitioners, and community partners. So we're going to focus on vital sectors like education, criminal justice, human services, while also welcoming special guests from the College of Psychology, College of Dental Medicine, and the College of Computing and Engineering. And join us as we celebrate our journey into R1 territory and explore what it truly means to lead with research, lead with scholarship, and lead with purpose. So stay tuned. Fall 2025 Investigation with Dr. T. It's going to be unforgettable. So welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are very excited tonight about examining the influence of a standardized law enforcement curriculum. And we are so happy because we have two amazing guests with us tonight. Dr. Christopher Powell of the Plantation Police Department and Dr. Vincent Van Hasselt from NSU's College of Psychology. And so tonight we're going to explore a critical and timely topic, and it's the influence of a standardized law enforcement curriculum and how we train officers. And we're going to be examining that. And you know, the interesting piece here is this shapes not only their skills, the officers' skills, but their mindset, their relationships with communities, and their ability to respond under pressure. With the nation engaged in conversations about policing, accountability, and trust, standardized training has never been more important. So let me just introduce you to my two amazing guests. First, Dr. Vincent Van Hasselt is a professor of psychology, President's Distinguished Professor, and Director of the First Responder Research and Training Program at Nova Southeastern University. He received his master's and doctorate from the University of Pittsburgh and completed his internship at the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. And Dr. Van Hasselt and I have sat on several dissertation committees together. We've worked together. I actually was a guest lecturer for a training that he did with Plantation Police Department. I love this guy. He is a real, you know, we used to talk about this in police work. You know, he's a real stand-up guy. And I really appreciate that he said yes to come on tonight and join us with spotlighting Dr. Christopher Powell, who is a Plantation police officer. He's a professor, researcher with nearly 2 decades of law enforcement service and a decade in higher education. He recently earned his PhD in CJ with us in a concentration in behavioral science, completed a dissertation that examined how Florida's standardized basic law enforcement curriculum influences cadet attitudes towards use of force, mental illness, and police discretion. And he also teaches in the criminal justice and psychology programs at Nova Southeastern University. In addition to teaching, Dr. Powell has specialized expertise in crisis negotiation, peer support, and critical incident stress management. Over 13 years as a police negotiator that focuses on mental health crisis. I am so excited to have him join us. Dr. Powell, where are you? What happened? There he is. All right. Awesome. Well, welcome to you both. I really am so excited, especially to highlight and spotlight you, Chris. Your recent, not too long ago, you were defending your dissertation, and we were very proud of your work. Dr. Van Hasselt, do you want to say anything before Chris gets into his portion of the presentation?
Sure. First of all, Dr. Telesco, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm always very happy to join you with these. We did one about a year ago We've worked on many things together over many years, and yes, you did a tremendous job at our crisis response team training within the past year. So we were very delighted with that. And it's been an honor to know Chris or Dr. Powell. I'm still not used to that because
Yeah.
that's pretty recent, but boy, he just did a fantastic job on that dissertation. He really went above and beyond in terms of the creativity and the thought that went into it. And I think that'll be very evident as he talks about the project, and especially the results are really, I think, very important for the field.
Awesome, awesome. So without any further ado, like we're here in R1 territory. You heard the trailer where we're talking about research, this whole entire investigation with Dr. T season, and this topic is near and dear to my heart. So I'm very excited. I don't want to waste any more time. Are you ready to give it to us? Give it to us straight, Chris.
I am, Dr. Slesko. Dr. Van
Thank
Hassel,
you.
thank you for being here with me. Always a pleasure having you on my side here. I really wanted to come on here and really share with your listeners my lived experiences as a police officer and my research journey, and I'm hoping to provide a little bit of some guidance and thought processes for those out there who do teach police officers. So I'll give you a little bit about me. I spent nearly 2 decades as a police officer, and on the street and as a full-time instructor. I'm a member of our crisis negotiation team. And then about a decade or so, a little over a decade or so ago, I started teaching as an adjunct instructor at the Broward Police Academy. And it was very enlightening to me, because I not only attended there as a cadet, but I circled back around and became, their instructor. And so one of the things that always interested me was, how do we make police officers, right? How do we take everyday citizens, members of society, and make them defined men and women that serve and protect our communities out there. I always looked at it from the standpoint that it's not what we teach, but maybe more along the lines of how we teach and how well, the curriculum, a standardized curriculum, plays into changing their thought processes. Again, everybody has a when they come into policing, will have their own preconceived notions. And that was what I was really interested in. The way I look at police officers is that they are regular people that has a really cool job. That's the way I looked at it. So that's really where I got my interest, and it always stayed with me in looking at, how do we build police officers. So my research, what I did was, I used a pre and post survey, a quantitative pre and post survey, and I was fortunate enough to have the support of the Broward Police Academy. As you know, collecting honest data in law enforcement is always going to be a challenge here, in the past, and in the future, because I believe at the police academy, one of the things I was concerned with was that I wanted them to give their truthful answers on stuff, but I wanted to make sure that that they knew that it would not affect their careers. So ensuring confidentiality was utmost and critical in my research. So I looked at a real time, using the pre and post survey method, and ultimately I found that I looked at three hot topics that are relevant today, like Dr. Telesco said. The first was, do police officers use too much force? I looked at the use of discretion, right? And then I looked at that the mentally ill are more dangerous than others. And my studies, I found a mixed results. Generally, what I found was that cadets that entered the police academy on day one generally believed that police use too much force. and that was on all of them. So that police use of force, too much force, excuse me, and they didn't use discretion enough, and they thought that the mentally ill were more dangerous than not. And the results showed me that at the end, that they, on their survey, they told me that they believed that police do not use too much use of force. They use an appropriate amount, not too much. Secondly, that the police officers use discretion well when it was when it was an option there. And then lastly, my mixed results here was that they really didn't change their attitude on those with mental health. And as you know, based on my research, what I found in the literature would show that the most mentally ill are not dangerous, and that if they are dangerous, it's usually those with a severe mental illness, and that they are more dangerous to their therapists than they are to law enforcement. So in a nutshell, that's what I found. And kind of the guiding light there was the curriculum. For example, the use of force is sprinkled throughout the entire 770 hours of the Broward Police Academy. It's taught on day one, and it filters through the entire curriculum. So it's talked about. The same thing with use of discretion. Use of discretion is used not only in arrest situations, but traffic involved incidents, civil matters. It's taught, sprinkled again through there. However, the mention or discussions on mental health is very limited, and so I kind of believe that we could teach the cadets a little bit better when it comes to the dangerousness of the mentally ill, and that could conceivably, in my opinion, change how we interact with those with a mental illness. And Dr. Van Hasselt, I'll give you he always gave me a good quote. He told me one time that those with a person with mental illness did not pick it. It picked them. So that stuck with me. And so a lot of my training from in my police career has centered around mental illness with the hostage negotiation. And that's it.
So I thought that that's great. I thought that you were going to share a PowerPoint, but that's cool. It's okay if you didn't. So Dr. Van Hasselt, do you want to come back on, and I'll spotlight you as well. And
Okay.
we could dig right into the questions that we talked about before. So let's
Can I
let's
make a couple of comments though, based on what Chris
please,
presented already?
please, please.
First, I think, boy, he really makes a good demonstration of the fact that, recruits that go to the police academy are thinking people, right? They're feeling people. And I went through the academy, as you know, many years ago, but I don't think it's changed quite so much. But at that point, and I think still the emphasis has always been on knowledge and skills that they need, directly in their work as police officers, which is true. And I see the importance of that. But I think Dr. Powell showed the fact that they are thinkers, that their perceptions and opinions can change once they get, good information. They are sensitive to research findings that are presented to them. This is a different generation that, they want to know these things. And I think this does affect their position on, very important points here. I'm also not surprised about the findings with mental health, and Dr. Powell and I have spoken about that at length. He can be more precise about this, but I think the number of hours devoted to the seriously mentally ill in the police academy is how many? Dr. Powell, you fill in the blank.
Well, there is a dedicated block of instruction in the Florida FDLE's CGST standardized curriculum for the year 2024 was 2 hours.
Okay, and that's 2 hours out of 5 months.
Yes, sir.
To me, that's almost ridiculous when given the fact that all police officers deal with a seriously mentally ill quite frequently. And he made the good point too that research over the past decade at least has shown that even those with a serious mental illness, let's say something like schizophrenia, um, they're not they're not violent. All right, now a subgroup would be violent. I'm going to get a little clinical on you for a second. The ones who are typically people with paranoid schizophrenia. That means they're schizophrenic with paranoid delusions. They think people are out to get them. But that's not enough by itself. It's usually combined with their self-medicating with things they're not supposed to be taking, alcohol or other drugs, and they're not taking the medication that they're prescribed to help them to get rid of the symptoms of, either psychosis or whatever else they're dealing with. So to have, such a small amount of time devoted to such an important topic has always baffled me. And it was about the same back in 1995 when I went through. That's part of the issue with mental health. I'm also very concerned, and we can talk about this later, and Dr. Powell, I think, will agree with me on this. There's not enough time devoted to mental health of police officers. And that tends to be very sparse as well. So we can get into that a little bit later. But again, I was not surprised that the question about mental health did not yield significant changes over time when you have so little time devoted and not enough information provided to, police officers in training when that's such an important part of what they have to deal with.
Any comment there, Dr. Powell?
You know, yes, and there is a significant portion of training at the police at a police academy, and I'm sure it's not just Florida or Broward County. It's all over, probably all over the country. That you spend more time, more training hours on skills that you are rarely ever going to use. Not to diminish use of force, defensive tactics, stuff like that, because again, those are lifesavers. But most would agree that every call that we go to, a call for service, is somebody in a crisis. It could be minor, could be major, but there is always that element there of recognizing, is this person in crisis? What can I do to help bring them down, to try to calm them, to get them to change behavior? The stairway model, to change behavior. And I think a lot of officers, unfortunately, don't recognize and just look at what's presented to be and not what's the background of it.
Yeah, and Dr. Telesco, you, me, and Dr. Powell are all very familiar with crisis intervention team training, CIT, which is essentially 40 hours of mental health training for law enforcement that's been become a national program in most of the country. Now that's 40 hours. My dream of this would be to embed for that type of training into a police academy curriculum. It's probably Dr. Powell will say that's probably impossible, but at least some portion of that, because the whole goal of that is to teach police officers more about the mental illness, and it includes crisis de-escalation and role playing around crisis intervention, and how to not have to necessarily, resort to lethal force immediately when there might be some other options. And that's training that's provided well after the academy. And it's usually officers who've been out there on the road for a few years already to be eligible to even get into that. Why not have some of that in the academy? Are the hours that tightly scheduled that there is absolutely no time to do that kind of work?
I think that's one of my criticisms of standardized training across the board, and that's what we see, and that's what we have in Florida. My background is from New York, and so we had a lot of latitude, a lot of flexibility, and role playing, I think, is key. Simulation, experiential learning, bridging that gap again between theory and practice. And we used to do these role plays, and I'm sure that you do them too. We called it the door. It was just the door. So the officer never went through the door. Like the officer was on one side of the door, the mentally ill person was on the other side, and it was all verbal de-escalation, all gathering intelligence verbally. And then at some point, one of the things that we don't have the luxury of is just walking away and saying, "Oh, okay, you don't want to come. That's fine. Never mind. We'll talk to you later." No, you have to take action. So at some point, you do have to call whoever, whether it be SWAT, in our case in NYPD, it was emergency services, and they would come in and they would finally take action, taking someone into custody, against their will, that they were not going to go voluntarily. But I really am such a big, I'm a big major advocate for role playing, simulation, experiential learning, even the firearm simulator, Milo, whatever kind of software you have, virtual reality software, whatever it is, there has to be this bridge between what I've learned in the classroom and then what I do in the street, because there is a disconnect when you get in the street. And you put all these other variables in, whether it be stress, whether it be department stuff, whatever. I just think that the training itself is usually good. There's a disconnect in the field, and I'm not sure how we get to that. What do you guys think? And that's a question that wasn't on the list. Sorry.
Well, Dr. Van Hasselt, I'm gonna go ahead to Dr. Van Hasselt's horn just a little bit. Um, and our relationship, the crisis response teams here in Broward County, Miami-Dade, and Palm Beach have the luxury and have had the luxury for many, many, I would say over decades, of Dr. Van Hasselt generously offering his doctorate students in psychology to be role players for negotiations, and it has proved invaluable because if you guys, everybody listening out in society, out in YouTube land, um, police officers do not make the best role players because they are a pain. They know what's coming. They know the answers to the question. When we use soon to be clinicians, psychologists, they play the roles very well, and it is so invaluable to have real, in my opinion, to have real subject matter experts to play the roles. And so, Dr. Van Hassel, for all of us in the crisis negotiation business, it's invaluable.
Well, I'm going to toot your horn a little bit because Dr. Telesco, Dr. Powell has been an active crisis negotiator for over a decade at least, many years of that being a team leader on our team at Plantation. And he knows firsthand, he's been helpful in directing the role plays that we do in training. And you need that because I think we all know that police officers tend to be very quick problem solvers. And, that's what they have to do. They get to a call. Even as reserve, I learned that very quickly. You get to a call and you might have, other calls waiting, or so you have to back up somebody. You have to get things, cleared very quickly. You don't have the luxury of time. So when we're doing crisis negotiation, and it's relevant to crisis de-escalation in general, that takes time. So you have to teach the officers the ability to establish relationships and build rapport. And as Dr. Powell knows, that's not an easy thing to do. And if you have other officers involved in the role plays as those in crisis, that it falls apart pretty quickly, for a number of different reasons we don't have to get into. Some are very funny, but it's not very instructive.
Right.
And I'm not sure at this point, and Dr. Powell can say more about it. Is role playing. I know we might be getting off topic, but I think this is pretty interesting what you brought up, Dr. Telesco. Is there much role playing that goes on of teaching skills, for example? In the police academy, I mean, outside of the range, but we're talking about dealing with people, establishing relationships, establishing rapport. Does that go on? I know the skills are important, but as Dr. Powell mentioned, a lot of skills they teach, they don't use anywhere near as much as some of these communication skills that are so important.
So is there a role play component? I know I'm totally off script now, sorry, but Chris, is there a role play component? Like for us in NYPD, there were four major role plays that every student, every recruit had to go through and do well in, and they were assessed. Then in service training, there's three role plays. So every year they got this sort of experiential learning right in their face, like they had to do it, and they enjoyed it. Do they have that in Florida?
They do. The again, FDLE and the CGST training commission, they're the ones who create the curriculum, set the hours, etc. And they have probably over the last probably 5-6 years or so, they've incorporated more. They call them, well, they have two different things. They have role plays and snapshots. And a snapshot is basically a quick 5-10 minute one and done, one person, scenario, kind of based on what the topic just was. So, and then they have a role plays, which are generally a little bit longer time frame that you can incorporate more students been doing it. Unfortunately, it's very rare to be able to get all of the students, all the cadet students, to be able to participate in it because of time frames. But then again, at the end of the academy, Broward College does an amazing thing at the police academy. They have a thing called grand finale, and grand finale is that they basically put the cadets out, and what they do is they are dispatched to calls for service, and they range anywhere from a robbery that just occurred, a Baker Act, a first aid scenario that's usually something in the nature of a baby that is choking, like a vagrant in the park, all kind of stuff, a domestic violence situation. So they are dispatched these things, and they're expected to handle it um, under the guise of trained instructors, which is whatever the two is the role players out there. So Broward College does that. I don't know of any other agency or any other academy that does that, but there is an element of that. It's just not very. There's not a lot of time for it.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So
And
I'm sorry, Vince, go ahead.
well, and I think that's the issue. Yeah, and Chris makes a great point. There's not a lot of time for it, and there isn't. He's right. But to me, that's, the time is not proportioned, exactly as maybe it should be. And I know there's not that much latitude, and that's where you get into the structure versus less structure, issue. But here, this is practical application of knowledge right at the last day of the academy. Would it make sense to do that maybe a couple times before you get to the last week? I don't know. You
Yeah.
know,
Well,
I went through that, and the other piece they used to have, I don't know if they still do. You had your future FTOs watching as well. Do they still do that, Chris? They've come and observed. No.
No.
no. Hey,
Okay.
listen, we got a shout out here from Wayne Bullier to Chris. He's on. The dean is on. He's the director in charge of the police academy, and he says, remember, curriculum does not belong to Broward College. It's written by the state, and it's the same across the state. That's the true like meaning of standardized curriculum, right? So
Absolutely.
let's move into we were talking a little bit about bridging the gap, right? So Dr. Powell is someone embedded in law enforcement practice, and Dr. Van Hasselt, a researcher in psychology. How do your disciplines view the strengths and limitations of standardized training differently?
Well, I can compare and contrast a little bit, from the psychology perspective, having also been, through the academy. And I'll tell you, there are more similarities than differences. In psychology, you have a fairly structured, and it's not completely standardized, but if you go across the country to different graduate schools, you'll see a lot of the same courses. And I'm talking about clinical psychology doctoral programs. Everybody has a stat sequence. Everybody has a psychological assessment courses. Everybody has treatment that they do. So that doesn't vary much. And much like in the state of Florida, you have FDLE, I think, sort of monitoring, I guess, and Wayne could say more about that. We have the American Psychological Association. The other interesting thing, Chris and I have talked about this a lot. When I get asked by police officers what I do at Nova, I respond, I'm a psychology FTO, right? Because my big part of my job is to supervise students who are working with clients or patients, right? Much in the same way that FTOs out, on the road with their new people out of the academy have to teach and train, in practical issues, and working with, communicating with people, and responding to calls. So yeah, oddly enough. Oh, and here I'll just get off of this in a second, but going back to crisis negotiations, and Chris knows this very well because he's really great at this. When we're teaching new negotiators, we start with what are called active listening skills, right? Open-ended questions, reflecting feelings, reflecting content of what somebody says, summarizing, paraphrasing, all those sorts of things. Those are the exact same skills that clinical psychology students learn the first time they start to work with clients, or actually before in coursework. In fact, I have a handout that I give my practicum students. These are new students who are going to start to see their patients, that I give to crisis negotiators. Exactly the same list, because they both need that. I mean, it's almost comical that you have fields that are considered so different, but yet the skill set is so important in certain areas, and identical as well. Because you know this, Cole. I mean, you've been teaching this business for quite some time yourself.
Yeah, Vince, listen, Wayne is also saying huge shout out to Dr. Van Hasselt, a true professional.
Oh, well, I've known Wayne for many years too, back in the Navy days, and he's always been wonderful and very supportive of first obviously of this project, or this couldn't have happened. But over the years, he just, he's so knowledgeable and so in tune with the issues, and we're very, very fortunate to have him, running that academy for us.
Yes, for sure. So Chris, you want to weigh in
Yeah,
on this?
I agree. Dean Bouyer, hey, thank you so much. I wouldn't be here without you, so I appreciate it. So from a law enforcement side, I really believe that standardized training is essential, right? And especially at the academy level, because it gives the cadets a baseline professional knowledge and skills in a standardized manner that every because unlike NYPD, Broward College, we have different agencies that are sponsored to come there. So we have all multi-agency, not only Broward but often Dade and Palm Beach. So the agencies can take that basis of knowledge and build upon it, especially in critical areas like use of force, legal authority, I don't know, ethics, and people in crisis. So it gives the benefit of the standardized, that no matter if I go to the police academy here in Broward, if I went to Escambia County, Florida's police academy, I'm getting the same material. So that should translate well to any agency that I would want to possibly transfer to. And so, agencies, that's how they have to start somewhere. And if we know where that baseline is, or that floor, we can take them. We can try to find the ceiling. So that kind of gives us a good basis.
I like that. I like that saying. That's excellent.
Um,
I'm going to move on. Okay, Vince, you want to double dip? Go ahead.
Yeah, by the way, it's not a minor point that every police recruit coming out of every academy in the state has to take that state exam, right? It's not a short exam, it's not an easy exam, and it's really based on that standardized curriculum.
Mm,
So, one could argue you don't want a lot of variability in training across academies, or you're going to have a lot more failures in that state exam. They're not going to be able to perform as police officers till they pass that.
right,
Similarly, psychologists, they can get their PhDs and PsyDs, but they also have to take, it's a national exam that they take, but it's the same idea. If
right,
they don't have a standardized curriculum as a graduate student in essential training areas, they're not going to pass that national exam.
right,
So
right.
you can make a very clear case for the need for a good deal of standardization with some flexibility. That's what I always try to add. Can we do some things above that? But that's again another parallel between the two fields.
Yes, good, good. I'm going to move into the psychological dimensions aspect. So training goes beyond tactics, and it shapes mindset, decision making, stress responses. What role do you see psychology playing in the design and delivery of a truly effective law enforcement curriculum? Who wants to go first? Chris or
All
your
right, I'll take
mentor?
I'll take the lead
Sure,
on this
yeah,
one.
yeah. Go
Okay,
ahead. Yeah.
awesome, awesome.
The as a practicing um, police officer, I look at psychology because it's very important when it comes to mindset, emotional regulation, and most police encounters are we make decisions, we have to make them under stress. So we don't always respond to just criminal activity. You know, They always say that we often meet people at their very worst moment. So that means we need to understand human behavior, how to speak to people, emotional cues, and that stuff's just as important as tactics, you know. And so, for me, when as an instructor for my agency, I like to integrate psychological principles into our training. So it helps the officer move beyond a one size fits all. If this happens, I have to do this. Well, let's take each individual, the person that's in crisis, let's take it as an individual. If we can identify someone that is indeed in a mental health crisis, we can tailor things to them, slow down, adjust our communication style, and hopefully avoid escalating the situation. And I got a really good example that I like to provide, um, of how we are often sometimes trying to be sensitive, but a lot of people take it the wrong way. For example, a traffic crash. Most traffic crashes are minor and routine in nature. But for the person involved in the traffic crash, it could be a major crisis at that moment. It has nothing to do with mental illness, but a crisis. I like to say that, hey, what is that? What if that's their only car? How are they going to get to work today, tomorrow, a week? Maybe they don't have insurance coverage that's going to give them a rental car. And so, when we get there and the person is obviously upset, given just being impatient or argumentative, we may say something like this: well, at least no one's injured. And it really misses the emotional reality of that moment. Whereas if we were paying attention and understood our emotional intelligence and said, maybe a way we could say it would be something like, I understand this is frustrating. Let me see what I can do for you to make this easier. you know and and we have to build on that. We have to work on that. It's not our nature, to be that way, but we have to practice that. And so, especially at Plantation, I like to discuss that kind of stuff. And in my teaching, I like to say, hey, what are their thinking? Make our words matter. So
Totally. Great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Vince?
Yeah, can I add to that? Because I always see it, as a psychologist who's had a kind of a foot in both camps, and obviously not the law enforcement background of Chris, and certainly not of Wayne. I've never been full time, but I've been at it enough to have a sense of it, and to deal with it as a psychologist, seeing clients and patients from law enforcement over many years. Two parts to it, and one, Chris is addressing dealing with people in a mental health or life crisis on the road, and that's again a good number of calls that law enforcement has to respond to on a regular basis. The flip side, though, is how about the mental health of officers themselves? And you've heard me talk about this before. I think we discussed this in a podcast probably about a year ago that you invited me to. Let me just present the big six of what I call mental health problems that are most prevalent in police officers: anxiety, depression, substance use, sleep disorders, PTSD, and suicide risk and suicidality. These are almost consistently found in research to be 2 to 3 times higher than civilian populations, right? Yet there's not a lot that's been done about these problems, and I don't think there's much that addresses these in the academy, and that may have changed. I think when I went through, which is ages ago, there was a stress management block, but really didn't do much of anything. Now we have behavioral health training programs, which don't have to be that lengthy. My students and I developed one that's 2 hours long that covers those 6 areas in an educational fashion. And it's not as if new recruits are going to think that that should be a concern. And when I do this kind of training, I say, you new people think this will never happen to you, and hopefully it won't. And statistically, it probably won't, but it could affect a partner, could affect a buddy. To me, putting some time into the mental health of the troops themselves, I think, is crucial. And we know that some percentage will develop things like PTSD. It won't be necessarily the majority, but it will be significant enough that we know we're going to deal with problems down the line. Why not at least do some education up front about that, and then reinforce that at individual departments later? And it's hard to sell that. Usually, you have to convince a chief that it's going to cost them more if their people leave early, at that level. So
Right,
anyway, again,
exactly.
what I call the two sides to the mental health coin.
Yes, yes. All right, let's end my like series of questions because I see that there are 20 questions in the webinar. So we're not going to get to all of those, but we're going to have our students, my project managers, pick three each, three great questions for both of you. But let's end with this one. If you could reimagine the next evolution of law enforcement training, one that integrates the psychology piece, education, field experience, what would it look like and what outcomes would you hope to see? Chris, you want to take it first? You're on mute.
Sorry, great question. Um, you know, adult learning is what we're talking about here. So, you know, if I looked at from a curriculum writer standpoint, I would really study on, how effective is the curriculum. For example, in my study, I would have psychology built throughout the curriculum, elements of it. Again, not a whole block, but elements of it. So officer would learn how to, maybe how stress affects decision makers, trauma, how it impacts your memory, how to recognize mental health or substance related crisis, because again, these are core competencies that are relevant to police officers. How can we make our trainings better, to adult learners? And so I look at from the standpoint of, we've always done something since 1985, should we expect them to succeed in 2025? And I have to say, I don't think so, because the job has changed, communities have changed, and the curriculum. Again, we have gone head, and I'm sure Dean Bouyer would say, but the curriculum has changed immensely from the time that I went through in 2007. So we're on the right path. So let's keep up the good work on that, to again build effective curriculum through research.
Excellent. 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 Vince, you want to round
Yeah.
this out?
Let me take it from the mental health standpoint and just say that the mental health components, unlike 20 years ago, they're really available now. We have behavioral health, we have peer support training, we have CISM, critical incident stress management, we have CIT. What we don't have are the time slots available to do these sorts of things at this point. So the wish list is that at least some parts of those sorts of things would be available early on, so people get at least exposed to them and they know what they are, and then they're reinforced later at individual departments, and that's of course a selling job in and of itself. But the pieces are there. When I started in this, and this goes back to '95 again, when I got out of the academy, none of this existed. It's there now. We have them now.
Great, great. So now I'm going to ask for my two students to come on, and we'll take turns. We might not be able to get both of your reaction to the question. In the interest of time, it's 7:43. But can I have Ethan? You want to come on first? Ethan is our Razor's Edge guy. He's pre-med. Where is he? Uh-oh.
Can I just add, Grace, you said pre-med, so you're talking about someone who's interested in real science.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Maybe he took a break. Eddie, are you around? Fischler Academy, representing in the house. What happened? Where are my people?
I'm here. I don't know where Ethan is. He was just texting me.
Sorry, I
Okay.
disconnected for a second there. I'm back
Oh,
now.
you're fine.
He's
You're
good.
fine. Okay, so let's share your camera so we can see you. And I always like to give you guys your props. Okay, so Ethan, give us a good question, and you get to decide who this is going to get
I have
sent.
one that says for all participants, if that's better.
Sorry?
I have a question for all participants.
Okay, go.
Okay, so for all participants, what has research shown between a paramilitary style high stress academy and an academic low stress academy?
Oh, good question.
Well, that's one for Chris.
Go ahead, Chris. Take it.
Well, Broward is, I would say it's a mixture of both. They do have cadets that do marching, they do physical training, they do formations. There's a chain of command, and and I think that's important because at least the agencies that I'm experienced with, that's the way they do business. So if it was a non-paramilitary type academy and they go to a paramilitary type organization, it could be a bit of a culture shock if they're not ready for it. So I think I think Broward does an excellent job of blending both of them. They have advisors who are in charge of, managing the class, and then your adjunct instructors who are there to deliver their subject matter experts. So,
Okay, great. Eddie, you want to throw a question to Dr. Van Hasselt?
Yeah. So there was a question from Delilah. It says it's for all three, but it mentions something that Dr. Van Hasselt mentioned specifically. So you mentioned that law enforcement officers are typically required to train for 40 hours and implied that that is not a sufficient amount of time for training. What does your ideal mental health training program look like for law enforcement officers?
No, what I said was a crisis intervention team training is a 40-hour program. And that's actually quite good. I call that abnormal psychology for law enforcement because it covers some of the major serious mental illnesses, and it incorporates role playing as well as consumers, i.e., those who have some of these problems themselves. In terms of the ideal time frame, it depends on what you're teaching or training. I think 40 hours at least is a very good start for mental health instruction. There just aren't enough it's called, again, crisis intervention team training. We call it CIT. I'd like to see everybody get that, but classes are typically 30 or 35 students, and they have them now, I think, every other month. So, everybody doesn't get that. I would hope someday, that's just a regular standard part of a curriculum somewhere, and every police officer has the opportunity to go through that.
Great, thank you. Ethan, are you around? Can you throw a question our way?
Yes, I am. So I have another question here, and it says,
Who do you want
um,
this question to go to?
this one can go to Dr. Powell.
Okay.
So, in Columbus, Ohio, they send social workers along with officers on mental health calls. Would this be more beneficial than having to train hundreds of officers in crisis intervention?
that's an excellent question. Co-responder units, I think, they can be invaluable, because again, you're putting subject matter experts and clinicians with trained police officers. Again, you want to have a police officer who is definitely CIT trained, experienced with mental illness, and then a clinician, because they provide, they look at a topic different than a police officer will. So between the two professions, we can probably get a very good solution that's beneficial to both society and the person.
Okay, great. Eddie, I know you got one. Who's this one
You
for?
Yes. It doesn't say who, so I think whoever wants to jump in on it, but
Okay.
they asked what challenges come with changing the curriculum when people are already accustomed to the current one.
I'll take that. Yes, FDLE, the CGST Commission, they do update the curriculum every year. They review it, they do updates, they make modifications. Sometimes it's a major overhaul on a topic, and so we do. I think our state does a very good job in trying to stay in front of what's needed out in the field, because the people who write the curriculum are generally subject matter experts who've had experience, and they take those persons from all over Florida, not just in Broward County, but all over Florida, to give a wider perspective of the problems and issues that you may have in a more rural area than our jungle down here.
Okay. How about
Can I add
Dr.
a shout out?
Please.
A shout out to Wayne. I believe, if I'm correct, that our police academy in Broward County has consistently had some of the highest scores across the state. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, consistently. I think we have probably one of the lowest failure rates as far as people completing the curriculum and passing the state exam. So to be ready to go back to their departments to fulfill their dreams. So I think, like I said, I'm very partial to Broward. I think we do a great job, and that's why I've been there for a decade and a half. So thank you
All right.
very much, Dean, for keeping me there.
All right. Ethan, you want to take one more?
Yep, my last one here.
Who's this going to be to? Do we know? Or just up for grabs?
I think it's up for grabs, really.
Okay, cool.
So when it comes to opinion on proper use of force, do you find a difference between ranks, specifically between officer and street sergeant? Mental health aside, does any rank affect these interactions?
Who wants to take that one? Chris?
Chris, I think that's you.
Yeah, I'll take that one. No, because again, your frontline officers usually are their rank is police officers, so they're usually the ones that are out and about, serving your community, interacting with people, responding to calls for service. Um, the one of the best thing about a sergeant coming on scene is that they generally don't have the emotional attachment at that moment. It can have a clearer thought process and see the whole entire um, scene unfolding, whereas the police officer in the moment is focusing on micro instead of macro. So use of force, it's all the same, and every sergeant was a police officer at one time. So
Okay, great. Vince, you want to double dip on that?
No, I think Chris handled that really well.
Okay. I have one that I'm just going to throw out here that I really like. This is from Presley Wade. Many smaller or rural law enforcement agencies often operate with if it ain't broken, don't fix it mindset and may be reluctant to adopt new training practices or curriculum updates. From your perspective, what approaches or strategies would you recommend to help these departments recognize the value of implementing newer procedures or additions to police training?
Oh, that's great. Really what it is, the way I tend to live my life, I only know what I know. So, we all have different experiences, lives. And so in order to be able to look at something and say we can try to do better, we have to try to hopefully have the wherewithal to say, I think we can probably do something better. I don't know what the answer is, but we can do better. So I have a good relationship with a lot of agencies around here with fellow training officers. And so I'm constantly calling them saying, hey, how do you guys do something? What would you do better, or what would you change? And so you have to be open to your decision makers have to be open to that concept, because if it's always worked, fine, but could we be doing better? And that's one of the questions that I think is, as leaders, they look at saying, well, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Well, I disagree with that mindset, because I believe that if it's not broken, can we do better?
Excellent. I love that. Vince?
Yeah, I've found, I haven't worked with rural departments per se, but I've worked with large departments. I've worked with very small ones, and it all depends on who's at the top. I've worked with some very small agencies, even in South Florida, where you have a chief or deputy chief who's really behind some progressive things, and they're trying to do things much differently. And you need that buy-in at the top to make some changes, and they have to have some motivation. Part of it is they want to make sure that people pass exams and get through and are confident on the road. Some are more open to more progressive strategies and approaches than others, and it's hard to say why. It's a lot of reasons probably for that, but I haven't seen it as a function of size of agency, for example.
Yeah. I love that you said that because, my 20 years, a great deal of it was spent teaching at the police academy and then coming back as a sergeant and then coming back as a lieutenant and being asked to lead the behavioral science department and revise the curriculum. And it really was something that was progressive at the time, way ahead of its time. It was the 1998 we're talking about. And interestingly, when those chiefs went away and went to another place and we got new leadership, all of that amazing, training and progressive thought gone in a flash, which is very sad, and that's one of the things I love about things that are standardized, because it really doesn't depend upon the leadership. It's a life of its own. The curriculum lives and breathes on its own, and also has a body over it that is like kind of regulates it. And that's the same in like psychology and social work, CSWE, for example. So I'm like a big proponent for standardized. I also am a big proponent for leading with progressive thought and leading by example. So I thank you both so much for being here tonight. And I love that you're evidence-based guys, and it's one thing to be a practitioner, and then it's another thing to be a researcher, and it's a really amazing thing to combine both. So thank you so much. I look forward to working with you both again soon. And any last words? Last closing remarks?
Well, I'll let Chris do the real wrap up here, but I just wanted to thank you, Grace, for what you're doing and, doing podcast, and you're very sensitive to the more progressive issues. I know that's partly your background, and both as a law enforcement professional as well as now an academician with a lot of experience in this. Hopefully the future improves.
Thank you, Vince, for being here. Chris?
Yeah, Dr. T and everybody else, I appreciate having me on here so I could discuss a little bit about my research, and hopefully it can adds to the body of knowledge out there to potential curriculum writers or decision makers who can look at this and say it works now, but could we do better?
Awesome.
And awesome, and also with Nova, I love that Nova's an R1 research institute, because that's going to allow me to take my research as a base and hopefully expand upon it, and hopefully do some good out in society.
Good. Well, listen, I want to encourage you to, put in your proposal for presentation for Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences, which is they're taking proposals now. IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. You got to get your research out there, and you got to get it right in front of the leaders. So if you want to know more about it, I'll tell you about ACJS. They are taking the proposal now for the March conference that's going to be in Philadelphia. No pressure, Chris. Don't worry. It's all good.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you for all you do, and what you do for us too, for NSU. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode tonight. I know I did, and hope that you join me next Thursday for Restorative Practices Independency Court, also known as Hope Court. And on this episode, we're going to turn to the power of restorative practices in reshaping our justice system. And who do I have? Dr. Marcelo Castro, who is the Associate Dean, Fischler College of Education School of Criminal Justice. And he's going to be joined by two attorneys, Miss Melissa Green and Kira Jackson. So please make sure that you join us. And hey, listen, we got a nice showing tonight. And if you have not subscribed yet to our YouTube channel, please just hit subscribe and then hit the bell for notifications so that when we go live, you'll know in the future. I want to thank our dean, Dr. Durham, Dr. Kushner, of course, Dr. Castro. Thank you to Ethan and Eddie, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us. And thank you to all my students, and don't forget to email me.